the whole ocean isn't about to collapse or anything, folks, but we have to start to get serious about reducing the inflows of carbon into the atmosphere and starting to push back. Maybe the whole ports of the ocean argument. I'm an optimist. And then the surprises. Okay, so I teach systems science as part of our sustainability program, and any complex system will have emergent surprises, emergence events that were not anticipated by whatever entity is managing that system, by definition. Coupled atmosphere ocean systems and subsystems are highly nonlinear. They're difficult to predict. They're nonlinear over years, over days, over weeks, over decades, and even over centuries. Via emergence processes, unknown unknowns can be predicted to arise. And all I got to say about this to kind of close is that many of the things now in the scientific literature and in this talk, no one was talking about 30 to 50 years ago. All of these knowns, or coalescing knowns we're talking about now, they were unknowns 30 years ago, 40 years ago, or they were unknown unknowns. We didn't even know we didn't know. Now there's a lot of things we know we don't know about, but we know that we know we don't know about. Right? I mean, this is really, really foundational. So unknown unknowns are coming. Maybe some of them will be good. And tipping points can be good. I always tell the students, it's not always a bad thing. There's lots of good tipping points. But, we need to be thinking very carefully about surprises. And this isn't just something that I had a feverish dream about one night. There's a big literature on this. Where very serious geophysicists and biologists and other folks with the National Research Council and others have put out books on unanticipated impacts of climate change. Okay, so we're in the home stretch. Thank you for lasting this long. So this is what we just went through in terms of the second section. Remember, there are 3 sections. We did like Climate, Ocean Science 101. The second section was applying it to oceans and estuaries, right? We're closing that, and we're about to go into the next section, which is going to go faster, and it'll have less science, sadly. Okay, so that's what we just kind of went through at the macro scale, okay? So now we're going to talk about what we can do. This is not going to be fully developed. I respect your time, but we're going to pop open some of those opportunities that arise from that question. The phrase compassion fatigue, which you might have heard of before, often applied to other sources of the fatigue, applies to this. If you're walking around feeling like you're carrying the earth on your back and 80% of your neighbors don't care or think you're crazy, that amplifies it. You're not alone. You're not alone. There's a lot of people dealing right now with this growing anxiety. Okay. It's okay. If you're feeling that way, you're not losing your mind, you're not crazy, okay? You're not a bad person. You're actually a really good person who's thinking more collectively and more in a data-centric manner. So the IRL National Estuary Program contracted out these authors to do a preliminary IRL climate vulnerability assessment. This is a summary image from that report. They identified, these are all different goals. If you've read the Indian River Lagoon National Estuary Program plan for the IRL, and I'm sure you're all very familiar with that. These are all very important and highly resolved program goals. Some of you are. These were developed by outstanding experts working very hard. These, Parkinson and Seidel came in and took those and then examined possible climate change vulnerability scores for these. And the bottom line is they ended up identifying 154 different potential risks to the IRL for climate change. Okay, so we don't have to be knocked over by this. Let's build from this. Let's be smart. Let's act like it's early in, it's 1940, it's 1941. Okay, we have to mobilize. We have to get our head out of the sand, and we have to mobilize and be Americans and fix this. And we can do it. We went to the moon, man, without computers as we know them today, right? I mean, we did that analog.
But we had catheters.
You did most of that analog. We can do this if we get the political will, and we can get folks to focus on the science. So in terms of what you can do, the Conservation Alliance of St. Lucie County and the Environmental Resource Department of St. Lucie County and other organizations in this area had a workshop last summer wherein they had a bunch of folks come on into Fort Pierce from different places in the state who've been working on climate change planning at the city, county level. And I was not at it, but what I've heard was that it was very productive and successful. We need more of this. We need very clear-eyed and thoughtful examples of this. And hats off to this preliminary effort. Planning for climate change is something that actually has been happening in a variety of states and cities, in some cases for 10 or 15 years. Okay. Don't think it's too late. Miami's been doing it explicitly for maybe 10 to 15 years. Hundreds of American cities are actively planning for coastal change. It's the American thing to do. There are many websites that are very useful for thinking about how to design your city for a future that's going to be wetter and with more extreme weather. There are many policy tools. There are planning-based tools. There are market-based tools. Okay? All we need are elected officials who will work together and take steps to catch up with the other cities and counties that are doing this. Okay? We don't have to invent new wheels. There's tons of information out there. Each one of these websites you could spend easily hours on. Each one of these policy options has potential utility. Another thing that's really very valuable, if you're feeling that compassion fatigue, is to join one of the local organizations. This isn't just a pitch for the Conservation Alliance. I don't care if it's Sierra Club Audubon. I don't care if it's the Women's Garden Club. I don't care if it's a bowling league. There's a few of those left, I've heard. Get out of the cave, get off the electronics, and interface with like-minded people. You'll be buoyed. There's so many environmental organizations, there's so many social justice organizations. And so then we're dealing with this still. And because of this, a lot of people are starting to really get more serious about this. An example I want to leave you with, and we're closing, is the Climate Solutions Caucus. Anybody heard of this? Yes. Cool. 10%, 20% maybe? There's something, believe it or not, called the Climate Solutions Caucus, and you must think, oh, you mean it on the Hill, the DC? That must be a bunch of extreme liberal radicals. Well, the beautiful thing about the Climate Solutions Caucus is that when it was developed, The rule of entry is that you have to bring somebody from the other side of the aisle. So if you were a D and wanted to join this, you can't join it until you do what?
Get an R.
Get an R. And you think, wow, what are the odds of that? The R's are more there than we often think. We have to create political space for them and their constituency. This is from about 6 months ago. It's larger now. This is the House of Representatives Climate Caucus. These are the Republicans, Democrats. Now, are they moving great legislation through the Congress that's going to be signed by the White House? We're not there yet. We could be there in 2 years. You know, the White House could be there even if there's not a change in the White House. People have changed their minds on climate like you wouldn't believe. They've gotten important. You know, if we have the same president a year from now, we could maybe get him.
Doesn't help us.
That's not the way that would get us there faster. Our new governor, who's a big supporter of the current president, I don't know if you're aware, but our new governor is talking about climate change repeatedly, very explicitly. He's created a chief resilience officer position. He's created a chief science officer for the state. He's a really good scientist who talks about climate change all the time. It's different than our prior governor. Same party. We might have to be trying to change the same party into the future. Let's not give up. A new thing here is that there's now, this is the House of Representatives, there's now a Senate Climate Caucus, believe it or not. And look at some of the folks that are in it.
Oh, geez, they won't do anything.
So, look at Senator Rubio's statement here. Okay?
Wow.
Changes in our climate, such as the rise of sea levels, are measurable facts. I look forward to working with my colleagues to find real and responsible solutions in a bipartisan way.
And he always tells
I'm
the
gonna, we have to hold people to their statements. Is this something he's been saying for 10 years? No. This is new. He got space with his constituents to say this, in part because the governor started to say it. You tip one influential, and you can domino a bunch of others. Closing. So when folks tell you, or tell me, or tell somebody else that they'll go through a list, there's about 15 things. It's volcanoes, it's solar cycles, you're getting rich off this, there's no consensus, it's good for plants. When you start to get all of that whack-a-mole stuff, if you talk to people about this, very smart people, great Americans, your brother, your wife, I'd encourage you to try to get them to understand. Give them that handout I gave you maybe, and if you can unpack it with them for 60 seconds. If you're saying that it's all BS, as has been tweeted recently by lots of people, what you're doing is you're trying to tear down pillars, the foundation of scientific knowledge for our society. I've watched this for 35 years, and that's what I just said. Collectively, that is what is happening. People doing this are simply following the line. Not bad people. They're our relatives, they're our neighbors, they're fellow Americans. Be patient with them. But it's okay to take them to NASA Climate and to show them the gravity of the error in trying to kill off centuries of accumulated expertise and knowledge. Engineers here, Fourier transform. You know, the guy that's credited with first identifying the CO2 as a greenhouse gas was Fourier, 1820. got to protect core foundational things for our society. These organizations are why we had the Industrial Revolution. You know, are we going to go back to the 1500s where if you try to do science, you're going to be burned at the stake?
Yeah, you're trying.
There's very foundational and important things here. And we can work it out, but we've got to recognize that there are ways to talk about this, and hopefully a few have been provided. I said there were over 20 other references. Here they are. This is my favorite slide. Oh, wow, man. Got one of those. Okay, so there's a version of this with the links coming.
How do we get this?
The slides are going to be, okay, as I indicated, thanks for asking, within a couple of weeks, we'll have a video posted on a website I'm about to show you, and I'll also post the PowerPoint file. How that sound?
Great.
That website is here. Pretty easy to remember, fit.edu/sustainability. The homepage on the right-hand side, give it 2 weeks, please. There'll be a video up there, and there'll be a PowerPoint file. Okay? If you need to reach me, or feel free. I might not respond immediately, but give me a day or two. There's that email address. And if you are a glutton for punishment, you might want to go to the Florida Tech Coastal Climate Adaptation Library that myself and some crazy students started 11 years ago. We made a total of $5,000 for thousands of hours of work on this. And this is the URL where you can find over 200 articles on Florida coastal climate adaptation. There is a lot of stuff out there for Florida.
Florida has a lot of water.
Thank you. Any questions? Okay. 1, 2, 3, 4. Let's do, okay, I got you, sir, you, ma'am, and you, sir. So, yes.
Yeah, you mentioned the Climate Solutions Caucus, you know, the D and the R.
Yes, sir.
They have to come in together. That was primarily the result of work that was done nationally by a grassroots organization called the Citizens Climate Lobby. There is a Treasure Coast chapter of the Citizens Climate Lobby that works to grow this even more so that ultimately legislation moves that puts a fee on carbon. So if you're interested in that, Jerry is somewhere, and he has a piece of paper you can sign to let us know you're interested in the Treasure Coast Citizens Climate Lobby.
Great, thank you. The Citizens Climate Caucus is interesting. Several organizations consider themselves to have a parental role in it. Thank you for bringing up CCL. I was going to get to it. It's awesome that I've heard that a St. Lucie or a Treasure Coast chapter is forming. I interact a lot with the Space Coast chapter, which you guys probably know. There's a chapter up in Melbourne, the Space Coast chapter, and I've also heard that there's now a chapter in Palm Beach County.
That's right.
Right. So CCL is a very important nonprofit actor in this with a focus on local grassroots advocacy. They have legislation they're very much behind, which would be an important step forward. Every major nonprofit group in the country has a 30-year seeming history on working climate change issues. Environmental Defense Fund helped draft the original Kyoto Protocol. They're still amazingly involved in this. World Wildlife Fund, Sierra. So there are many, many outstanding organizations, and good for CCL for being on the ground at the county level. Yes, sir.
First, I'd like to thank you for sharing your information. I think it was very informative. But on the other side is I think you're being way too optimistic. I believe that we are in a desperate situation right now, that we have to take drastic actions. How do you feel about the Green New Deal as it's being presented in Washington?
Good question. My optimism is strategic. Last time I checked, 50% of the voters in the country don't buy any of this.
Right.
So, and the communication science research on this shows that you have a better chance of penetrating your information with those folks if you are presenting it as solvable. Okay, so the Green New Deal. The Green New Deal on paper is a fascinating thing. I think that what happened, unfortunately, is that a lot of other centers of gravity in the Democratic Party were not consulted on that, and it was a surprise to Speaker Pelosi and a lot of other folks.
Right.
They didn't feel that they had ownership of it. Their dog wasn't in that fight. And there were some components of the Green New Deal that, in the views of many, might have overreached a little.
Yep.
And we could break that down, but we don't. So I'm a fan of the Green New Deal. I wish that the strategics of its launch and some of the text had made it more palatable for a lot of the leaders in the party. Perhaps if there is, if we see substantial changes in the federal positions at the executive level in the White House and in the legislative branches, the Green New Deal could resurface in a form that was able to survive the bipartisan dog and pony trading that's going to happen. So the Green New
Don't
Deal.
you think it's greed that's really causing all this? It's
Well-
it's the businesses and growth and more, instead of stop the growth. I mean, back in the 60s, it started, there was this thing called the population bomb. It said, we are going to be in this situation unless we stop growing the planet. We didn't do that. Okay, now we're faced with this, and this is inevitable.
Look, now you've gone to an even deeper.
I know I have.
And that's growth. Now, you show me a politician who's going to get elected on a no-growth agenda. No, I don't. It's not. Unfortunately, it's not a joke. It's not a joke. It's the reality. So the term in the climate science community and the climate policy community for this, some of you know, is BAU, business as usual. So we are in a BAU political structure. The Green New Deal didn't have the pulse it should have had because it challenged too much of the BAU structure. No one expected the Soviet Union to collapse.
No.
1987, the 1988 National Security Intelligence Report of the CIA did not predict what happened in '89. No one saw it, really. A bunch of things came together. Tipping points can be good as well as bad. I'm very worried, but it doesn't advance. I feel from experience our ability to communicate and move other people if we come in and say it's too late, or the system is so broken we can't fix it. So on the issue of growth, you know what they're doing in Europe? Those crazies over in Europe? They're having scientific and economics conferences called no growth conferences or slow growth conferences. And they're dealing with the ultimate challenge. Can we have a human societies moving forward in this century where we're happy with 2% GDP instead of 4? Can we have corporate reporting cycles where we're happy with less growth? So very thoughtful comments. I appreciate your energy and your insight. Very important. I'm going to work in this from all kinds of grassroots and grass tops levels. People are just going to stand up and walk out of the room if you start to talk about growth. Unfortunately, I talk about it. That'll be on the third. That'll be the third talk from this one 2 years from now. Okay. Waiting to hear back from some of those Europeans. Okay. Very good. Thank you. Yes, sir. Yes, ma'am.
I'm from Brevard originally, spent 47 years there, and came down here a year and a half ago. I think that FIT was responsible for the oyster pads that when we had the pollution in the Indian River, and they had citizens making the oyster pads. Since I've been down here, I haven't heard whether they have been a success, if they have made any changes in the filtering of the lagoon or not, and is it still continuing?
Sure. They're more commonly, thank you, that's a good, they're more commonly called oyster mats. Do you guys have those down here? And I think that, again, parental origin-ness, I think that the Nature Conservancy often gets credit for being the original catalyst of that, but Florida Tech has certainly been involved. I am not an expert on the efficacy of oyster mats. It's a complex issue to really say if they're working well or not. I know that some people will tell you they're working well. I know other people who are very skilled marine chemists who don't think that the scale is such that they're going to have as big an impact as we would like. I don't know the absolute answer. That's a very important question, and ideally, I would like to think that there's going to be some highly resolved literature coming out on that in the next few years.
Well, the reason I ask is because, you know, when it started, we heard so much about it. Everyone was talking about it, and this might be a way of helping clean the lagoon. And Florida Today had article after article about the number of people who are going and learning how to make these mats, and they were putting them in by their docks and, you know, the water and everything. And then it just kind of fell off, and then I moved down here, and so I hadn't heard any more. And I thought, well, are people still energized by this?
Oh, yeah. It's become an industry almost. I mean, not an industry, but it's a movement that has a lot of momentum still.
Okay,
I
so has
cannot
momentum.
tell you
That's what I was wondering.
I cannot tell you what the latest peer-reviewed journal literature says about that. I don't know if there is a latest peer-reviewed literature yet on that, but that's a very important thing. Thank you. Yes, sir?
Yeah, I did.
Yes, sir.
You mentioned methane as a major contributor to climate change. The landfill, livestock operations, oil frack. What are the major causes of methane buildup?
Okay. Methane, CH4, it's only in the atmosphere for about 15 years. Good. Bad thing is it traps heat about 20 times more efficiently than carbon dioxide. Bad. Methane. One of the most important things we can do, it's in the UN, just brought out a big report on this, the World Health Organization as well. One of the most important things we can do to reduce climate change, to reduce carbon inputs into the atmosphere, is to convert societally, this is another one of those big things, to convert societally away from our extraordinary recent addiction to beef. I'm sorry if you like your steaks and your hamburgers, eat them up, don't listen to me. But we have now a population of cattle on the planet that completely dwarfs the number of domesticated species, like 10, 100, I don't know how many folds. What do cows do? We're very good at. I think the scientific term is flatulation. You know that word, flatulation?
Spelled P-O-O-P.
Fart. And when you fart, no matter what the mammal, it's high in relative methane. Pigs and cows are methane factories at magnitudes that are extraordinary. What's the primary reason that the Amazon rainforest is being eliminated? Logging, mining, cattle farming. They're clearing out the forests to raise cattle. I was fortunate. I don't go to Europe that much. My wife and I were able to go there last summer. Everywhere we went, there were gourmet burger restaurants in London. Hamburgers are now a gourmet meal. In Miami, a place just opened next to the place that I bought 40 years ago. I have a kid living there. The burgers are on the rise. The incredible growth industry. cows are a big part of the methane issue. There's a lot of other big parts of the methane issue. Really big part of the methane issue is all the peat that's thawing in Arctic zones around the planet. Massive, massive, massive amounts of methane are being released by the thawing of the Arctic Circle. And it's thawing like crazy. The relative increase of heat planetarily is much higher in the Arctic than in the temperate and tropical zones. So there were peat fires in Indonesia. Peat fires in Indonesia, which is obviously not the Arctic Circle, I believe in 2008, that released amounts of methane that were like almost at a global annual scale. Methane. It's released during fracking operations, which gives us our cheap natural gas. Methane is a big part of it. Thanks for bringing up methane. There were a couple over here, and then we'll go with you. Some of the people over here. Dr. Yoshioka.
Back to your snorkeling in Jupiter Inlet. You said it, doesn't compare, or snorkeling now doesn't compare to the 1970s. What about people who snorkeled there in 1940s? The point is this idea of a shifting baseline. Now, in terms of climate change, nobody's really experienced the effect of climate change. You don't have a shifting baseline and say, boy, things are really terrible now. Seems like you have to change that whole public perception about it's really happening because nobody sees it happening.
No one, okay. A couple of interesting things there. Thanks for bringing up shifting baselines. Great point. The Jupiter Inlet snorkeling in the 1940s would have been remarkable. But from the 40s to the 70s, there was a change. The change from the 70s to now is arguably a higher magnitude change. That's Dr. Paul Yoshioka, who is an extremely accomplished marine ecologist and scientist, who I first took a graduate class from at the University of Puerto Rico in 1982, and who walked up, and I haven't seen him in 20 years before this, and his wonderful, extremely talented wife, Cricket. So thanks for bringing up shifting baselines. That explains a lot of why the new folks don't get it. What they're seeing, they don't understand the change. Towards people not seeing it yet. I've heard that for 20 years, and now in NGO events and such, where people who really work climate more full-time than I do, they're very eager to bring in people who will testify that they see it now.
The scientists see it. I'm saying.
No, I'm talking about they're very eager to bring in people like tribesmen from a village in Africa who's 80 years old or 60 years old and has never seen droughts like he has now. So that's a very good point. I can tell you that full-time NGO folks working this more than I do are on that in some organizations. Environmental Defense Fund has had events where they've brought to their board meetings for skeptical conservatives on the board. They've brought in tribal elders from forests in the Amazon to explain what they've seen in terms of higher temperatures. So that's a great point. In terms of us here, something we're cursed by in Florida is most people living in Florida aren't Floridians. Yeah, so we don't have that baseline to compare to. Very good point. Glaciers are a really alarming thing. I didn't understand the whole glacier thing fully until I'd seen a video about 3 years ago. I got off the NASA climate website. It was called Planet of Ice. And it was about Earth. And I learned that, and I share this with my students now, that there used to be 200,000 glaciers on the planet. 200,000. They are melting extraordinarily rapidly. People who run ski resorts, these aren't necessarily glaciers, but traditional snowbound areas, are very familiar with this. So Dr. Yoshioka, for example, in some cases, you've got ski resort operators who can talk about how the baseline shifted. So, good point, sir. There's this gentleman, and then there was here. Yes, yes, sir.
What is, when you say the unknowns, what's your worst case scenario? What an unknown would be to happen?
You mean known unknowns or unknown unknowns?
Yeah, I mean, what kind of scares you in that
Unknown
sense of
unknowns or
something?
known unknowns?
Unknown unknowns, yeah.
The U squareds. If I knew, they wouldn't be unknown unknowns.
I know, but what kind of, I guess.
Yeah, I know, that was pretty weak effort.
What what keeps you up at night in terms of,
I don't dodge, but I'll feint like I'm gonna dodge. Unknown unknowns. Well, let's start with the unknown unknowns. We'll see about those. There's some known unknowns that people are really worried. No, I can't. You're asking me to give me a little more time to think about that. I can come up with some things.
Okay.
Maybe what we should focus on, great question, are the known unknowns. And one of the known unknowns is what's going to happen to the West Antarctic ice sheet. Everybody heard of the WAIS? Pay attention to the West Antarctic ice sheet, especially you young folk.
Also,
Because the West Antarctic ice sheet is becoming destabilized faster than we thought. And if that melts at rates higher than what we're predicting, and the rates that they're predicting in the IPCC assessment reports every 6 years are always low. 6 years later, they kick those up. Sea level rise, if there's catastrophic ice melt, if there's ice shelf collapse in the WAIS, sea level rise could, in theory, go up like a meter in 5 years or 10 years. That's kind of a low number from some of the things I've heard. So one of the known unknowns that people are worried about are accelerated, unpredicted magnitudes of West Antarctic ice sheet melt. Anybody got your own? Anybody got?
Collapse of the thermohaline system.
The collapse of, okay, so another known unknown is, are we going to see radical changes in the Gulf Stream?
Yes.
There's very complex thermohaline current structures, and I'm not going to start to unpack that. I encourage you to look at you can Google search things like the slowing down of the Gulf Stream, or the Atlantic Meridional Ocean Circulation, I believe, is the AMOC, is the acronym. There are a lot of oceanographers putting a lot of focus right now on what could happen in 50 to 100 years to 200 years. Maybe it'll be 300. Maybe it'll be 75. Right? These are geophysical systems that we can't put exact dates on. But there's a lot of evidence to suggest that the Gulf Stream as we know it is going to be behaving quite differently, which has a lot of implications for fishery species. And it's not only about fish, man. What's the Gulf Stream do? It controls local climate from here to Maine to freaking England, Northern Europe. So thank you for that, Dr. Canary. Yes, ma'am.
June 8th is World Ocean Day. We are on 8 acres on the North Fork of the St. Lucie River. The water is filthy, dirty. June 8th, 2021, we are planning an educational opportunity for anyone who wants to come out. I believe that the way people are going to change is by education. Just educate. Thank you so much for your education tonight. And my only question is, will you come speak at our 2021 World Ocean Day? If we're not underwater by then.
No, we're good for being submerged then. Thank you. I'll certainly consider it. Get my card and all. Great. Yes, sir.
And real quick, that movie that was that Racing Extinction?
Yes.
They had a visual on the CO2 with filters and hammers, and you could actually see the exhaust. And was that valid? And I was disappointed that we didn't see more of that if it was valid.
Are you talking about is that Racing Corals? Say that
Racing
movie?
Extinction.
Chasing Corals? No, there's a movie, Chasing Corals.
Yeah, this was Racing Extinction.
Racing Extinction. I'm sorry, I don't know that movie.
I think it was
You need to watch it.
You need to watch it.
Okay, so they showed CO2 emissions out of,
They showed emissions with airplanes, automobiles sitting in traffic lights. And it was phenomenal. Supposedly, it sounded like we were going to see more of that sort of a visual.
very important,
Just went away.
very important, and I know that folks, it's amazing how late you stayed, thank you. Okay. I worked in the nonprofit community for many years with large national nonprofits. I worked DC, I worked Tallahassee. I've heard people who do this much more full-time than I do, the policy and advocacy side. I've heard them say since the early 1990s, it would be different if it was blue or green if CO2 was visible. It would be different. So I've also heard if ExxonMobil owned the sun, we'd all have solar energy.
The librarians are telling us it's time.
Okay.
Sorry.